Hello and welcome to Japan Lyric Room. In this program, we explore the lyrics of Japanese songs, delivering clear explanations of their meanings and unique cultural backgrounds. Please note that while the voices and illustrations in this video are AI-generated, the project itself is run by two Japanese creators living in Japan. The script is carefully researched and written by us to provide original explanations.
It is so great to be here. I'm really looking forward to getting into this one with you.
Yeah, me too. So today we're going to explore a really fascinating cultural crossover. I want you to picture the year 1989.
Oh, a great year for music.
Right. And imagine the pioneer of American soul music, the legendary Ray Charles. He's in a recording booth, and he is just pouring his absolute heart into a song. But here's the catch. The song was originally written in Japanese by this famously husky-voiced, kind of clumsy rock star.
Yeah, that cover was for a massive Suntory whiskey commercial campaign, and it just became a total global phenomenon.
It really did. But, it brings up this huge, fascinating question for us. How did a Japanese pop ballad from 1979, a full decade earlier, possess enough raw, universal soul to bridge that massive cultural gap?
Well, that right there is the core mystery we're unpacking today. We're looking at the 1979 love ballad Itoshi no Ellie, or Ellie My Love, by the band Southern All-Stars. And, to really understand its impact, you have to look at the musical landscape of Japan back in the late 70s.
Right, because it wasn't exactly a gritty era for pop music over there.
Exactly. If you were tuning into the radio back then, you were mostly hearing these pristine, heavily orchestrated pop ballads. Everything was very clean, very polite and idealized.
Super polished. And then along comes the lead singer and songwriter of Southern All-Stars, Keisuke Kuwata, and he basically just kicks the door down.
He really does. He brings in this incredibly emotional, almost raw vocal style.
Yeah, the melody is just drenched in these heavy soul and R&B influences. Like, it didn't sound pristine at all. It sounded lived in, if that makes sense.
It completely did. And, that sound resonated perfectly with the cultural climate that was building up in the 1980s. Actually, a few years after it came out, the song became the theme for this massive hit drama called Fuzuroi no Ringo-tachi.
Oh, right. Which roughly translates to irregular apples, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Irregular apples. And the show followed these young people who were, awkward. They were striving really hard, but they were constantly making mistakes in life and love.
So they weren't those perfect, shiny apples bound for some fancy gift box.
Right. They were bruised. They were irregular. And Itoshi no Ellie essentially became the anthem for that exact feeling, finding the real beauty in being flawed.
Which I think makes Kuwata's approach to songwriting so incredibly compelling. Like, he actually once noted that Japanese lyrics have better makeup for emotional expression.
That's such a great way to put it.
Yeah, he somehow managed to break down Japanese syllables so they could fit an English-like syncopated R&B groove, while, and this is the important part, refusing to lose the wet, heavy emotional nuance that really only Japanese words can carry.
Which is an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk musically.
Definitely. So our mission in this lyric explanation is to explore exactly how Kuwata pulled off this delicate balancing act. We've got 7 specific phrases from the song lined up to guide us through this blend of Japanese emotion and universal soul.
Let's just jump right in. Let's start by looking at how he sets the stage. The very first phrase we are analyzing goes,
okay, so the literal English translation is essentially, I've made you cry. And even when I'm cold, as long as we have the feeling of staying close, it's fine. But the cultural nuance here is crucial. So I'm going to read this translation exactly as it captures that depth. I've made you cry, and I've been cold to you. But as long as we have the feeling of staying close at heart, Yorisou.
Yes. The absolute anchor of that entire thought is that Japanese concept of Yorisou. It roughly translates to staying close, but it goes way beyond just physical proximity. Like, doesn't just mean standing next to someone in a room.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It implies this emotional gravity where your hearts are actively leaning on one another. You're sharing in the other person's pain, their joy, and all their vulnerabilities.
Okay, wow. So instead of following the standard fairy tale romance script, the whole I will be your perfect knight in shining armor routine, he's tearing that script up on page 1.
He really is. He's throwing it away.
Yeah, he is straight up admitting, like, I'm a clumsy man. I mess up. I've actually been a jerk to you.
We have to remember the timing of that admission was crucial. For listeners back in 1979, the airwaves were just saturated with idealized romance. So presenting a realistic, flawed love like this was a total shock to the system.
I bet.
It wasn't a song asking the listener to pretend to be flawless. By leading with this admission of inadequacy, he's basically asserting that the willingness to weather the storm together, the Yorisou, is what actually forms a real foundation.
Right, because admitting you're a mess is a great start, but, I mean, it's really only half the battle. If he's a guy who openly makes mistakes, how does he prove his ultimate commitment to her? He has to strip away his ego somehow to show he's actually serious.
And he does exactly that, but he does it through a single, very specific word choice. And this brings us to our second phrase.
And the exact cultural nuance here is, to me, from my perspective, you are the last woman I will ever meet in my life. You are irreplaceable.
So we really need to talk about the word he uses for I, or me, in this line. Because Japanese has incredibly diverse first-person pronouns. And the one you choose instantly signals your relationship to the listener.
Right. The pronoun does a lot of heavy lifting.
Exactly. Like a pronoun like watashi is formal and polite. A man might use boku to give off a humble, soft, or maybe an approachable impression.
Yeah, boku feels very safe. It's gentle, almost boyish in a way. But Kuwata doesn't use boku here, does he? He uses ore.
Yes, ore is heavily masculine. It is casual, it's rough, and it's completely unfiltered. So by saying ore ni shite, from my perspective, he totally drops all polite pretenses.
That feels like such a deliberate artistic choice. It's almost like he's taking off a stiff, formal suit and speaking in a completely unguarded voice.
That's a great analogy.
Because, I mean, I imagine he's probably terrified to be making this massive, lifelong vow. Declaring that she's the last woman he will ever meet is huge, so he kind of hides that embarrassment behind this gruff, casual ore.
Yeah, it really grounds the immense vulnerability of what he's saying. The contrast is exactly what makes it work. The weight of the commitment is amplified precisely because the pronoun is so unvarnished. He is offering her his truest, most flawed self.
Wow.
However, once he reaches that level of vulnerable honesty, the narrative takes a really surprising, almost dark turn. This is our third phrase.
Okay, so the cultural nuance for this is, if the passion between us were to cool and we became cold and indifferent to each other even when our eyes met. Now, I have to push back a little on this lyrical choice here.
Okay, go ahead.
If he is so committed and he just stripped away his ego to declare she's the last woman he will ever love, why does he suddenly bring up the possibility of them growing cold and indifferent? I mean, doesn't that completely puncture the romance of the song?
I get why you'd say that, and it might seem counterintuitive at first glance. But if we look at the mechanics of language here, the key words are zameru, which means to cool down or lose heat, and surnai, meaning to lack empathy or become indifferent.
Right, both very negative concepts.
Yes, but by explicitly forcing the listener to imagine the cruel, painful end of their love, he isn't ruining the mood. He is actually magnifying the preciousness of the present moment.
I see the logic. It's that contrast again. Like, you don't realize how incredibly warm the fire inside the house is until you actively imagine the freezing blizzard outside.
That is the exact mechanism at play. And this coexistence of joy and sorrow is really the very definition of soul music. If you think about the blues, you cannot reach the highest emotional highs without acknowledging the lowest, most painful lows.
You have to have both.
Exactly. This lyrical bravery, the willingness to look the death of love right in the face, is very likely the emotional depth that attracted an artist like Ray Charles to the melody in the first place.
That makes total sense. It fundamentally changes the texture of his song. He's not blindly optimistic, you know? He knows love can fail, which actually makes the choice to stay even more powerful.
Exactly.
So when he's faced with that terrifying cold future he just imagined, how does he fight it off?
Well, he fights it off by seeking warmth in her. Specifically, by focusing entirely on her smile. And this is where he brilliantly blends two languages to create this really universal rhythm.
This brings us phrase 4.
And the cultural nuance reads, I want you to smile more. That innocent, childlike smile continues to fill my heart. So, the Japanese word carrying the real emotional weight here is mujaki. It translates to being innocent, completely without malice, much like a child. But the true genius here is the how. Is how Kuwata merges the English phrase, on my mind, with the Japanese sentence structure.
Yeah, I've always noticed that when you listen to this track, you just don't feel a jarring language barrier at all. Like, it doesn't sound like a Japanese pop singer awkwardly inserting an English phrase to sound cool. It just flows. How does he actually achieve that sonic blend?
It all comes down to rhythm and vowels. So traditional Japanese is mora timed. That means each syllable usually gets an equal staccato beat. It's very evenly paced.
Right.
But soul and R&B require a syncopated, fluid backbeat. They need swing. So the ni in Mujaki ni acts as this perfect phonetic bridge. He slurs the vowel sound right into the on my mind, creating this rhythmic pocket that belongs entirely to soul music.
Oh, wow. So he's basically treating the Japanese language as an instrument. He's bending the syllables so they ride the R&B backbeat instead of fighting it.
Exactly. He's molding the language to the music.
And that totally elevates the lyrics into a universal message of love because you feel the groove before you even process the translation.
He truly uses language as instrumentation. But, this innocent, joyful groove is pretty fleeting because the narrative escalates dramatically in the very next line. We move to phrase 5. The cultural nuance is, even if you were to vanish somewhere far away and disappear from before my eyes, that is a massive escalation.
It really is.
It almost feels violent in its finality compared to the soft innocence of her smile in the previous line.
Yeah, the weight of the vocabulary shifts heavily here. The word Ikiuseru does not just mean to go away or to leave. It means vanishing without a single trace, becoming utterly and permanently out of reach. It is an extreme, devastating, hypothetical scenario.
Right, so it's not just a casual breakup or an argument, it's this paralyzing fear of, what if you are completely erased from my reality? And he introduces this extreme hypothetical to demonstrate the ultimate level of devotion. The underlying philosophy here is that even if she physically vanishes, the memories she gave him and the impact she had on his soul can never be stolen.
Oh, I see.
His love is no longer dependent on her physical presence.
Man, once you accept that terrifying, absolute worst-case scenario of losing someone entirely, I imagine it really shifts your perspective on the day-to-day relationship. Like, the small annoyances probably don't feel so heavy anymore.
That realization is exactly what bridges us to our 6th phrase. Having accepted the possibility of total loss, he learns to embrace the everyday friction. The lyrics go. And the cultural nuance for this line is, even this frustrating, impatient relationship, it actually suits someone like you just right.
So let's break down the mechanics of the emotion here. Motokushisa refers to a deep feeling of frustration or impatience.
Like when things just aren't clicking? Yes. It is the feeling you get when things are not going exactly the way you want them to, the natural friction of two separate lives trying to merge. And Hodoyoku means just right, or the perfect amount.
So he's looking at the friction as a feature, not a bug. He isn't demanding a frictionless cinematic romance anymore.
Right. He's looking at her, flaws and all, and deciding that the slight awkwardness and impatience actually suit her perfectly.
What really stands out to me here is the phrase anatanya, which means to you. It's incredibly colloquial. It sounds like a whispered, intimate marker of distance.
It really does.
Because this isn't a fiery, dramatic teenage romance where everything has to be flawlessly poetic. This is a mature, kitchen table kind of love. It's two adults acknowledging they annoy each other sometimes and deciding they fit together anyway.
I love how you phrase that, the kitchen table kind of love. That mature acceptance is the essence of the song's enduring appeal. He has accepted her flaws. He has accepted the frustrating friction of their relationship. But that leaves one final question for us. What happens to his own internal state if she isn't there? How does he describe the emptiness of his own heart? And this brings us to our 7th and final phrase. And the cultural nuance reads, if my heart is cold, unstable, and freezing, like sleet, a mix of rain and snow.
From a linguistic standpoint, this is perhaps the most fascinating line in the entire song. The core word is Mizore, which translates to sleet. Now, by meteorological definition, sleet is a weather condition where rain and snow are already mixed together.
Right, it's already a mix.
Exactly. Therefore, grammatically speaking, adding majiri, which means mixed with, creates a totally redundant double word. Mizore Majiri literally translates to a mix of rain and snow mixed.
So if you were turning this in for a grammar test in school, it would be marked incorrect. It's a blatant redundancy.
Strictly speaking, yes. And when the song was first released, critics actually pointed out this grammatical error.
Yeah, but Kuwata chose this phrasing intentionally. He prioritized the emotional resonance and the heavy, wet feeling of the syllables over strict grammatical rules. This stylistic choice, willingly bending and breaking the Japanese language to fit an overwhelming emotion, became famously known in Japan as Kuwata Bushi, or Kuwata's unique stylistic flavor.
I find that absolutely brilliant. A perfectly grammatical sentence just isn't strong enough to hold that much unstable emotion. Like, think about the imagery here. If you step outside into pure snow,
Right.
it can feel romantic, right?
Yeah, beautiful and quiet.
And if you step out into rain, it feels clean and you can just use an umbrella. But sleet is miserable. It freezes you to the bone and makes everything messy.
It really does.
To have a heart that is experiencing an overwhelming, suffocating cold and mixed with sleet is just an incredibly evocative way to describe absolute emotional devastation.
It really paints a vivid picture of a man who is completely lost without his partner.
Yeah.
And that truly synthesizes the emotional core of this entire lyric explanation. Itoshi no Ellie stands as a monumental piece of music because it captures a clumsy man's pure, unfiltered feelings.
Yeah, it doesn't hide anything.
Exactly. It holds on to that wet emotion, that deep, sometimes contradictory vulnerability unique to Japanese lyricism while possessing an international soul and rhythm powerful enough to cross oceans.
It bridges two totally different worlds. It combines the intricate, poetic vulnerability of the Japanese language with the raw, belted-out power of R&B. It's a reminder that you don't have to be a perfect person or a shiny, regular apple to experience a life-changing kind of love.
Absolutely. Every single word we explore today, from the unguarded intimacy of using or, to imagining the tragic end just to cherish the present, all the way to breaking grammar to express a freezing heart, it was all meticulously chosen to serve the absolute truth of his feelings.
It really leaves you with something interesting to think about. Consider the music you listen to on repeat. Have you ever noticed moments where an artist breaks the rules of grammar or logic, just like the Kuwata-Bushi redundancy, to express a deeper truth? Sometimes the most incorrect sentences are the only ones capable of capturing how we really feel. Thank you so much for listening. We feature various Japanese songs and provide detailed explanations on our website. Please check the link in the description to explore more. If you enjoyed this program, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your thoughts or song requests in the comments. See you next time. This was Japan Lyric Room.